I'm Todd Myers, Vice President for Research at the Washington Policy Center. And usually I give a preview of the week ahead in the legislative session. But this week, however, I think it's more important and appropriate to assess where we are in the session and, frankly, where we are as a state. So, in the last week, we saw two dramatic examples of the failure of Washington state's current policy approach, with the release of an unsustainable budget with massive and destructive tax increases. And we saw a really desperate and undemocratic court ruling to ban natural gas heating in new homes that does nothing for the climate, but is clear evidence of Washington's failed climate policy and that it's just really an expensive and wasteful way to try to make the people of Washington state reduce their energy use. And it really turns the people of the state into the enemy. Both of these announcements last week are an admission by our current political leadership that they have failed badly over the past decade. And rather than come to grips with that failure, they are now doubling down on the very policies that have created that suffering. I want to make it clear, however, that we cannot lose hope. Spring is coming. The baseball season starts this week, and we can change the direction of the state. I have seen it happen in other countries that have thrown off bad policy. I've seen it in the United States at the national level, and I have seen it right here in Washington state. We can do it again. And I'll tell you how Washington Policy Center are going to work to make that change happen. But first, we need to take a hard look at two big decisions about budget and climate policy that came out this past week. So the budget proposal is the strongest evidence of absolute failure of the state's political leadership over the past decade. According to the Washington Research Council, the largest tax increase in state history before this year that was proposed was $3 billion. The budget proposed by the Senate Democrats includes a tax increase of $8 billion and another of $7 billion. And the House Democrats have proposed two tax increases of $4 billion each, massively eclipsing what was previously the largest tax increases in state history. And those taxes hit small businesses, farmers, and many others. As we pointed out in our report cards for Washington's future, Washington's tax system is already the fifth worst in the nation for businesses. This would make it even worse. Now, notably, Governor Ferguson has said he wants to avoid new taxes and has been looking for ways to cut spending first. I think that's really good news. But the budgets coming from the leadership of the House and Senate Democrats are clear evidence that their policies are simply unsustainable. Legislators and Jay Inslee spent a decade making promises they could not keep, and now the very people they claim to care about are being held hostage to that policy failure. Indeed, despite a massive increase in spending over the past decade, Washington state is worse off today than it was a decade ago. Again, our report card for Washington's future demonstrates that education test scores are worse today than a decade ago. Our roads are worse. Our ferries are worse. Forest fires are worse. Housing costs are worse. And of course, crime is worse. After all of that, we are told that unless we give billions and billions in new taxes to government bureaucracy, everything will be even more worse. Remarkably, the leadership of the legislature admit things are failing. They admit that the state is in a mess. And yet the very people who got us into the mess claim they're the only ones who could get us out. The arsonists want us to believe that they're the firefighters. Rather than taking responsibility, they will blame everyone else for their failures. They will blame Donald Trump, who wasn't even in office when Jay Inslee admitted his budget was a disaster. They will blame the other party, who's had zero power in the legislature and over the budget. This is the politics of fail and blame. They fail again and again, and each time they blame everyone else but themselves. But they know they have to blame other people because they know they have failed. The minute those same politicians blame others, it is a clear admission that they know they have failed. So every time they say that people will suffer if we don't raise taxes, we need to remind everyone that those same politicians are the ones whose false promises put families in that position. They told people to become dependent on government, and now they are blaming others for their failure to be responsible caregivers and their failure to be good stewards of the state. If people suffer, and they might, the politicians who created this mess bear the responsibility for that suffering. So, this is why the most compassionate approach is to empower people to make their own choices. Only we know what is best for our lives, and only we can make decisions that suit our circumstances. Earned success is the path to happiness and self sufficiency, not the false promises and phony compassion of politicians. We need to stop letting politicians cultivate powerlessness and empower people. The second example of the failure of state policy is the ruling last Friday by a King County judge overturning Initiative 2066 and a vote of the people to allow natural gas home heating. That court case is evidence that our climate policies are really an abject failure. If the state's CO2 tax, known as the Climate Commitment Act, was working, we wouldn't need these kinds of costly and wasteful regulations that the people just rejected. Climate policy that sees people as the enemies, forcing them to accept policy that they voted against, is the very definition of failure. Rather than a policy that allows people to find the best way to be the most efficient, government bureaucrats and politicians cut deals behind closed doors, imposing rules that make life more difficult for the people of Washington, while politicians and companies use government power to line their pockets. Again, these are the same people who have claimed that their climate policies are working, only to find that they are failing spectacularly. These are the people who said that the cost impact of the CO2 tax would be pennies, which is now 40 cents per gallon. Again and again, they're wrong. And again, the only solution they offer is to apply more force, more regulation, and double down on that failure. It is time for responsible people of all parties to come together and say, this is unacceptable. In a decade, the legislatures and politicians in charge turned a state that was on the cutting edge of innovation, growth, and opportunity to a state that is punishing the people to save government. But we can turn it around. Washington still has the entrepreneurial spirit of problem solving that can change things. It is simply no longer possible to ignore the fact that legislative leadership have no ideas but to double down on the policies that created this mess. Now, history shows many examples of where dishonest politicians and failed policies were thrown out by the voters. There's no silver bullet. It's going to take many efforts, but the Washington Policy Center will keep working hard for the change we need, and we're doing three key things. First, we are finding new ways to push back against bad policy. That's why we sued the Departments of Ecology and Commerce earlier this year, to hold them accountable for their incompetence and dishonesty. The same people who tell you that they can manage the entire economic transition in the name of climate change over decades can't even report data that isn't years old. That's why also we're working with local officials to push back against the dictates coming from Olympia's failed politicians. Second, we're making sure that there is accountability for politicians and government bureaucracies. When they succeed, we will praise it. And when they fail, we will highlight it. As we have seen, with accountability for failure, the state will dig itself deeper and deeper into it. Finally, we are continuing to promote good policy in Olympia and educate the public. We will keep working with legislators of all parties and perspectives in Olympia. In the last few weeks, we have talked with elected officials of both parties, state agencies, and many others about finding common ground to change the direction of the state. And we'll keep educating the public about how to solve Washington's problems. But change takes time. It has taken a decade to destroy so many great things about this state. It will take time to repair that. And frankly, in the fight against destructive ideas that cause misery and suffering, we are on the front lines. Every victory against the false promises and phony compassion of government waste stops those corrosive lies from spreading elsewhere. It is a hard fight, but it is an honorable fight, and it is absolutely critical. State is worth fighting for. It is our home. It has incredible opportunity, and now is the time to defend it.